So welcome, Sabrina. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. We met through a mutual friend, and I was so excited that she connected the two of us because she told me you were writing your PhD dissertation on highly sensitive people. And you were nice enough to share with me a draft copy of that before you actually turned it in. And I was just really I was really excited to see the framework you had developed because it really matched the experiences that I've had while coaching clients. And so I was hoping you could just share more with everyone about your work that you've been doing.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I just completed my dissertation and passed my dissertation defense on work around sensory processing sensitivity. Specifically, I looked at lived experiences of highly sensitive people, looking at experiences of empathy, experiences of transformation. And I did all that through the lens of gender diversity, which just means I intentionally included people in my study who are non-binary, transgender, just other than cisgendered people, to get a broader view of what these experiences are, especially in relationship to emotions and emotionality and the stigma around being emotional or seen as over emotional, which is quite often the case with highly sensitive people. The work that I did, the research that I did, really what it brought out for me and what I learned from it was that there's a very common sort of trajectory for the transformation that people who are highly sensitive go through. Once they identify, they learn that what's been going on in their lives, whether it's being called oversensitive, being over emotional, that they were told they were shy, that there was something wrong with them for the way that they expressed emotions, that coming to understand what sensory processing sensitivity is, help them to reframe those experiences and really have a different understanding of themselves, of their identity as a person who is emotional and who processes things so deeply and is affected by the environment in such impactful ways. One of the key findings was that it's understanding that the emotions that one is experiencing as a highly sensitive person are not necessarily their own, but that we're being affected by other people's emotions, in a very somatic sense, in a very dramatic sense. And that identifying that was key into shifting awareness and shifting perspective, and then coming to a new understanding of what it means to be sensitive, so that there could be a lot of benefit finding and really coming to see it as a superpower, as something that could be used not only to better their own lives, but to help the people around them, to serve the people around them, whether it's their family or in work relationships. That being highly sensitive is not something that needs to be overcome, but rather something that can be embraced and a wonderful part of who you are and how you experience the world, once it's understood and been really, and when you find ways to deal with it, like improving self-care or changing emotional or relational boundaries with people so that you can have the space that you need to be who you are.
Beautiful. So I know a big part of what you want to do with your work is actually to move into the coaching space. And I was curious what you discovered through your research that might apply to coaching.
Sure. I've been putting a lot of thought into how can I take what I've learned, both through my own journey as a highly sensitive person and what I learned from the participants in my study, that I can then apply to helping others. It's a very common thing for highly sensitive people to feel, at least the ones that I've spoke to, who are aware that they're sensitive and have really embraced it, to want to take the way they experience life and take the benefits of being highly sensitive and give something back, be a supportive, helping person in the world, whether it's professionally or personally. And so in thinking about being highly sensitive and in the conversations that I've had, especially with people who are not aware of the trait, whether they're sensitive or not, I was asked questions like, well, how do you get diagnosed for that? Or is it like autism? Very pathologizing ideas when they first hear about sensory processing sensitivity, as if it's something that is wrong with you as a highly sensitive person. So one of the things that I would like to do is to really educate people and remove some of the stigma around being highly sensitive. I'd love to do that for people in helping professions, whether it's educators, clinicians, anybody who's in a profession where they are working with, groups of people where there might be, very likely 20% highly sensitive people in those that they're working with, and how can they identify them and support them, understand what they're going through, and then support their needs in those settings. That's one thing that I would like to do, to just increase awareness about sensory processing sensitivity and reduce the stigma around emotionality in general. From that, I would also like to work with highly sensitive people in that process of transformation and coming to understand that they're sensitive, and being able to shift and transform their lives to being healthier and happier and more comfortable, just moving through the world instead of being overwhelmed by so many things all the time. So those are the main goals for me and what I would like to do. I'm still formulating how I'm going to go about doing that, but it feels like there's so much potential. There's so much work to be done, and we're needed. Highly sensitive people are needed to do this work.
So from your research, I know you did a lot of interviews with people, highly sensitive people. And I was curious, what were some of the themes that you discovered that could probably apply directly to the coaching?
Sure. I interviewed 16 people who are highly sensitive, and they were all already aware they were sensitive and had been adapting to the trait. They'd come to an understanding of it. So one of the things I found in my research was their stories around this journey and coming to find out that they're highly sensitive, what it means. And then from there, looking sometimes back at their childhoods and reevaluating the experiences that they had, seeing them in a new light, reevaluating their relationships. What I found about highly sensitive people in relationships is that we tend to be very intentional in who we want to spend our time with, how we want to spend that time. Small talk and being somebody with lots of relationships and friendships that aren't very meaningful, very surface, is not something we tend to be attracted to. But in conversations, we like to go really deep, really fast, and we want to get to what's important in our lives, how we really feel about things. So there is this depth of understanding, a desire to go deep in relationships, and not much tolerance for people who are especially negative. Remembering that as a highly sensitive person, I'm going to be affected by whatever the people around me are feeling. So I'm going to want to surround myself with people that that feel good. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with, not to label emotions as good or bad, but I would say some people are more draining emotionally, and some are more energizing. And as a highly sensitive person, I need to be aware of the energy of the people around me. And if the people around me are accepting and aware of my sensitivities, and we can have conversations about it, then it's much more comfortable. It's much less draining than being around people who don't understand or are not in touch with their own emotions, and maybe become uncomfortable if I'm trying to talk about something emotional and they're like, no, I don't want to go there. But learning to navigate all of that is really important in the change process, from seeing sensitivities as being something that's wrong with you to seeing it as something that's profound and important and beneficial. Some of the other things that I found, particularly around self-care, and that the people that I interviewed already had some self-care practices in place before. Most of them had self-care practices in place before that they understood they were highly sensitive. But what changed when they understood their sensitivities, was that the focus of self-care shifted to more emotional well-being and balance, ways of clearing the emotional energy that they felt was stuck on them and in them. And that well-being and self-care was also interlinked with their relational boundaries, being able to say, I need time alone now, or I don't want to go to that event. It would be too draining for me. So an empowerment around self-care that was also interconnected with relationships.
Did you find any particular self-reported forms of self-care that seem like a pattern or especially helpful?
Yeah, salt baths.
Salt baths.
For some reason, it's my favorite. I don't know if that maybe influenced the results. That was one of the most common, very simple self-care practices was taking a salt bath. And there were many other forms of self-care that were reported. Yoga, meditation, mindfulness practices, being out in nature, alone time. But it varied. The self-care really didn't look different from what less sensitive people do for self-care. The emphasis was on the restorative nature of the self-care. So if somebody were going to exercise, I mean, exercise is for physical health and well-being, it's good for the mind, but exercise is a way to release mental and emotional energy and stay in balance. Might be a different way of thinking about self-care instead of just the health benefits or the clarity of mind or other things that are traditional aspects of different forms of self-care.
And would you say self-care is kind of almost like the vehicle to like greater self-empowerment for highly sensitive people?
It's complex. They're without an understanding of the sensitivities and an understanding of why I experience the world the way that I do as a highly sensitive person. Without that understanding, self-care doesn't have the same depth. And having an understanding that increases maybe even the motivation for self-care. If you see self-care as something that you do because, we all know we're supposed to do our self-care, it's good for us. We have a real norm around, take care of yourself in a society that is structured so that we're not really supported doing that. But I think generally self-care can feel like something we're supposed to do. We're being good if we're doing our self-care. Whereas for a highly sensitive person, it becomes absolutely necessary to maintaining emotional balance and being able to navigate in the world with other human beings, that without an ability to regulate myself emotionally, I really can't function in the world as well. So self-care has a much more meaningful part in my life because of the importance in maintaining like emotional balance and being able to just exist. I can feel a difference in myself just doing something like going for a walk, maybe at the beach where there are a lot of other people around. That when I'm exhausted, burnt out from work, just feeling run down, that when I'm out and about with other people, I feel like a sponge, and that everybody's emotions are just out there, and I'm so aware, and I'm just cued in to people. Whereas if I'm rested and I'm balanced and I'm in a much better place kind of internally, that I don't feel like I'm as much of a sponge, and I can go navigate the world and feel safer, in groups of people, not as affected, still open, but not as bombarded, with other people's emotions.
That's a great way to put it, because a lot of people, perhaps early on in their self-discovery journey as an HSP, they tend to maybe need to create very hard boundaries in a way because they've been overwhelmed for so long. But I think as at least with the clients that I've worked with, as they progress along their path, they're more able to allow things in, but they kind of are solid in their own being so that it doesn't affect them so much.
Right.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I I think as a highly sensitive person, I understand myself to have access to emotional energy just uh, in a more extreme way. I mean, for
Mm.
example, my I one of my dogs passed away not long ago,
Mm.
and I'm the kind of person that, I can experience grief. I, can cry. I'll talk about it. Um, it's it's a part of a human experience that I'm okay with.
Mhm.
Um, but with all of the grief that, so many of us have gone through because of COVID, because of war, and just all of the things that are going on. When I opened myself to the grief of losing my dog, I felt like there was this river of grief energetically out there available, and that, I for a moment just stepped into it, and I was aware of this broader sense of grief.
Mhm.
Um, and I could identify, because I'm aware of my sensitivities, that like, oh, my own grief is opening me to all of this other grief that's out there right
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
But because I understand my sensitivities, I didn't have to take all of that on as my own. I could recognize it, feel it, and then leave it.
Mm.
Come back to just experiencing my own grief. And what that gave me is this deep sense of compassion and love for all of those who are grieving. And I think that's where, as highly sensitive people, we have the potential to see the connectedness
Mhm.
in all things and in all people. And emotion seems to be this uh, emotion seems to be at the root of what connects us all. I'm still
Mhm.
formulating that in my mind. I love
Yeah.
being asked questions where I don't know what the answer
Yeah,
is.
definitely.
Um, but there is something about the depth of our feeling in our hearts
Mhm.
that allows us to connect with other humans, with animals, with nature,
Mhm.
in a way that is powerful, and I think
Mhm.
can be a motivation for, wonderful work that we can do as highly
Mhm.
sensitive people.
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. I know we've talked about offline in the past about this concept of maybe balance, in the sense that it sounds like with the framework you've developed, a lot of people, I mean, it's probably cyclical, but a lot of people early on in their journey really embrace this idea of gentleness, like being kind and compassionate to the self, slowing down perhaps, um, because they're reacting, to a world that's pushed them or misunderstood them for so long.
Mhm.
But I know you personally I don't know if you self-identify as a high achiever or high performer, but I know you do a lot. And so I'm curious about, even if it's your own personal journey or what you've discovered through your research, as far as that idea of maybe balance, or yeah, the balance between gentleness and, action, and whatever you consider the other side of that to be.
Sure. Oh, there's so much in that question.
Yeah.
High achieving, yes,
Mhm.
and driven.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, myself and others, there's this potential for trying to strive toward like a perfectionism,
Mhm.
because we process things more deeply.
Mhm.
Because for me, when I look at anything, I see all of the interconnections, I see the
Mhm.
complexities, and I love to think about it. I
Mhm.
love to create, um, whether it's in my writing, in my academic work. There, there's a place that I go, especially when doing research and writing, that is all consuming. And I love to be in that flow state of
Mhm.
doing the work. and then can get really irritated if I'm knocked out of it or not able to stay in it. So I'm trying to think the interconnection with this high achieving thing. It isn't for me high achieving for achieving's sake. It's more that I have to get the marrow from the bone in everything I do. I had one of my professors say something along the lines of, like, in doing research and writing, she was like a dog with a bone. And I understand, I'm like, oh, me too. So if there's this sense of I need to see something through, I need to give it my best. It's been a learning experience for me to back off and say good enough is good enough, and to prioritize and balance and leave something. So I don't know if that really answers the question about the high, the high achieving. It's the sense of being driven. So
what do you feel drives you, like either the inner experience, like what is driving you towards, sucking at that marrow?
It's the love of the work and the meaning and purpose of the work, because the end goal for me is to be able to take what I've learned and help other people, whether it's through coaching or teaching or writing or more research, mentoring. I've always been called to be in service, in a helping profession. And in my personal relationships too. I've always been drawn to, I'm the kind of person that when I'm sitting in a coffee shop by myself, minding my own business, people will come up and just start talking to me. I mean, that's my normal experience. And I will talk to them and I will listen, because for me, that's very fulfilling. Even if it's not what I had planned that day. There's this sense of, again, the connectedness with other people. And that in order, my own growth is connected with their growth. My well-being is connected with their well-being. And this sense of moving through this lifetime with other people and wanting to engage with them in a way that's beneficial for all. That's always an underlying motivation for what I do. And when I'm really like a dog with a bone, it's because there's some complex idea, something I can sense that is in the work that I'm doing that I'm going to be able to pull out, and it'll be the nugget that I can pass on to somebody else.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing with everyone. Are there any kind of final thoughts that you might want to talk about as far as what you think would be helpful for people to understand about their sensitivity and how they relate to the world?
In the traditional research on sensory processing sensitivity and the neuroscientific studies, theoretical work, there isn't an acknowledgement, or there's a shying away from the term empath or anything that is seen as, paranormal experience, exceptional human experience, psychic experience. And I understand that in the scientific community, it's often said, well, there's no evidence to support that these experiences are real. Well, there's no evidence because we don't ask the questions or do the studies. In my work, I really wanted to identify the experiences that highly sensitive people have around empathy and clair empathy, or that the empathic experiences that go beyond just, mirror neurons in the brain and one-on-one connections with people. So that's something that I hope to further with my work and to bring more acknowledgement to. It was really important for the sensitive people that I spoke to have some validation and acceptance around these clair empathic experiences that they were having, that it wasn't just in their head. It wasn't something to be stigmatized, but they were having these deeper experiences of emotions that reached across what is scientifically understood to be empathy. The way that I described stepping into a river of grief, feeling this deep emotion that's out in the world on an energetic level. I would like to do more research around that, and I would like for there to be more of a conversation about the validity and the importance of those experiences for highly sensitive people. Whether you embrace the term empath or you think that that's too new age and woo-woo, the actual experiences that we're having, that many are having, are important,
Mhm.
and should be acknowledged and discussed openly, I think, so
Mm.
that we can learn more about it.
Mhm. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I definitely personally, I don't know if I self-identify as the empath as a label, but I know that I am able to often directly experience the emotions of those around me. And so it's always I can often verbalize what they're feeling before they even become aware of it. So that's
Yeah.
always neat to
Yeah.
experience. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations together. At least I hope we will.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing with us. And I look forward to further chats.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have the conversation with you. I always enjoy talking with you, Mike.
All right.